G'day everyone, welcome to the show today. Today I'm pretty excited because we have to finally get the 34 Ford out of the back corner, which is way over there, and get it out here in the main part of the workshop. Now I've got this pair of axles, and the front one is a 39 axle, and I like this one because it's got a mounting point on it for a panhard rod on it, which will be part of our final suspension design. And I've put on that side, I've got a 34 hub on it. They don't fit properly onto the 39 stubs, but it's enough for mock-up. And this side's just got an old Model A hub on it just to get a wheel on there and rolling. And at the back end I've got a 35 axle. Now the torque tube drive for this one is just way too long for our application, but once again, just for mock-up and getting it rolling and moving, it's going to be perfect. Okay, so we've got the car hiding over in the back corner, and we'll just take a bit of a walk over there, and it's kind of got locked in and buried over the years, so I've got a bit of stuff to move out the way, and once we've got that done, we'll get a tractor in here with a crane on the front of it, and we'll be able to lift the frame out, get it out here into the main workshop, and hopefully get it set on our axles today. So follow me over here, and we'll go over into the old piece of the shed that my great-grandfather built back in the 1930s, and we'll see what we've got to do to get the Ford out. So one of the considerations was having enough room to get the 34 out of the back corner. Now the spray booth, which is just here, was positioned so I would have enough room between this corner of the booth and this pole over here so that I could actually get a car through. But since it's all been put there, stuff's accumulated. So there's been shelves added along the side of the booth because I needed a bit of a paint storage area, and then all these storage cabinets here have been added afterwards. Twofold the reason for getting it out. One, I want the car out in the workshop where I can work on it easily, but also I'm planning a redevelopment of this area through here. So everything's got to come out of this corner of the shed as well. So our plan today is to shift these shelving units and all the stuff that's on it, and we'll get them put into a new location, and we're going to have to shift the bandsaw, and then hopefully we'll have enough room to just get our tractor in here, and we'll dismantle all the Ford, and we'll cut the frame rails off the table where they're still welded to it, because this was the jig that I used when I welded all the frame together, and then we'll be able to lift the frame out with the tractor, carry it around the corner, drop it on our axles, and then we'll start building the car back up with all the components that we're going to take off. Now, way back in 1983, I painted my first ever all-over paint job, and the car was parked exactly in here. So, as a bit of a twist, I'm going to build a new spray booth in here and put it back in the exact same location, and that'll be cool. Now this old booth beside us, that'll get pulled out, and we'll have a new one. I'm building a new section on the shed, which will be a dedicated paint shop, and the booth that goes here will be a drive-through. So I can actually do my fabrication work in the main workshop, go into this booth, and we can do the priming work in this particular booth, and then take it through to the other side, and there'll be a big preparation area out there, and then we can actually go into another booth, and we'll be able to do the final paint jobs and the baking in the really good booth. So that's the plan. We'll just see if I live long enough to make it all work. So I'll rip all that out, and we'll shift that cabinet to where I want it, and then we'll start unloading another one. And that one's more fun because it's full of 34 Ford parts. This is a lifetime's accumulation of things. The new parts have turned up as I've been buying stuff for jobs. So here's an interesting thing. It's a new old stock main shaft for an Opel 4-speed. Now my 1967 Holden sedan has got a factory fitted Opel 4-speed, and it's due for a rebuild. So I've been accumulating eBay treasure over a few years to build it with, and I've now got enough parts to build a completely brand new genuine transmission with new old stock parts. And this was the last piece. So that'll be a video coming up, is when we pull the transmission out of that and rebuild that. Big mess of wires. Wow. Now that's several Volkswagen wiring harnesses for our, at the moment, stalled Herbie project. I have a lot of trouble with dust in my shed. Being in a rural location, it's not like we've got sealed roads and other buildings around us. We've just got open paddocks, so we get quite a lot of this fine dust blowing in which accumulates everywhere. and hence the reason that I keep covers on most of the projects in here. Now, this is the fun shelves, because this has got a lot of 1934 Ford stuff stacked on it for our project. So I've got instruments, I've got lights, I've got horns, I've got locking hubcaps, locking fuel cap, but this is the treasure. This is the rev counter I'm going to put in the centre of the dash where the ashtray hole is. Now if you bought a 1934 Ford new and got the radio option, the radio goes in the centre of the dash in the same place as the ashtray, and it looks a little bit like a rev counter face. And the first time I ever saw an original dash with a radio in it, I thought, wow, that's just got to have a rev counter put in that spot. Now it turns out this is perfect size. The dimension is the same as the original radio face, it'll fit in the dash perfectly, but it belongs to a 1934 Auburn. Now, naturally the people who restore Aubans have got more money than me. This is new old stock, and yes, the Visa card was maxed out to get it because I desperately had to have this gauge to go in my dash. And it's cable drive, and I'll run that off an adapter on a modified Corvette distributor. Now, shh, don't tell any Auburn people this, but I'm going to get the face reprinted to make it look like a Ford face, and I want a little Ford V8 logo put down the bottom of it. But don't tell the Auburn people. Now I'm going to run 1936 deluxe gauges. So I've tracked down a set of nice originals suitable for restoration, and the deluxe gauges have got double gauges. So I've got an amp gauge and a temp gauge in this one, and its mate has got an oil gauge and a fuel gauge. Now during 1936 Ford went to an electric fuel gauge rather than the old pneumatic type one that worked just by pushing a bubble of air backwards and forwards to make the gauge go up and down. So these are desirable, and yes, you've got to pay a bit more money to get them, but this is a very restorable gauge, and it's been tested before I bought it, so I know it works. So we'll go from there, but I'm a bit tempted to modify an electric fuel gauge to fit it into the capillary temperature gauge, but it will mean reversing the gauge face and reversing the way the needle travels. So don't know if it's possible, but I desire to do it, and hopefully that'll be enough. And I have a 1936 Deluxe Speedo. Now notice by the odometer, this one's actually new old stock, but it has suffered a little bit over the years with a bit of shelf wear and there's a bit of a dent in the rim. And what I'm going to do is, because we're going to match it up to the Auburn rev counter, it's got a deeper bezel on the front, so it's got this quite deep ledge in here where the Ford gauges don't. So I'm going to machine up a brass adapter and get it chromed and sit it on the front of here to give the Ford gauges the same depth as the Auburn gauge, so that when they're in the dash and the faces are all restored to match, that they'll all look exactly the same. That's the plan. I'm not throwing these in a hole in the ground, no. I'm going to be placing them on the shelf. This is real treasure. It's taken me a long time to accumulate this stuff. I'm just amazed at some of this stuff that's still kicking around as new old stock, never been fitted to a vehicle since the 1930s. Now, something a little bit different. This car will go to car shows, and even though it's going to be built as a hot rod, I've been collecting up a set of tools because I want to do it almost like a restoration. So we will have a full set of tools on display when we display the car. I've got an original owner's manual and things like that. So it's going to be a crossover. It's not a restoration, it's not a true full-on hot rod, but I want to build it in a way that it's a stealth hot rod. Set of 1934 tail lights, and look at the condition they're in. These have been kicking around on a car, they're used ones, since 1934, and they are almost pristine. So very little work to restore those. A selection of original tools still to be restored. I've been collecting them up and I'm looking for better ones all the time. So that was the first one of these, or Stilson or pipe wrench that I got, and since found a better one, but I'm sure there's better ones out there still. So we're trying to make it look like a very low mileage original car when we get to the display point. I'll have a massive collection of tools by then. And here's the aerial. This is going to mount in the centre of the roof, facing up, and it's actually off a 1940 car, and wait for it, new old stock. So can't get much better than that. It does need a bit of restoration work because it's had a bit of shelf damage over the years, but that is just going to look the absolute duck's nuts. It's going to be genuine Ford, so fitting, so period, and just that roof mounted aerial that was common for the era in these cars. Probably won't have a radio, but I'm going to have an aerial. Now, whenever Lou Bant drew the Coupe Ute, he always drew it in deluxe form. And even though it was plausible that you could order from Ford Australia a deluxe version of the Ute, no evidence exists that they were actually ever built. The other thing is owners could actually option them up themselves, but we're talking Depression times, so there wasn't a lot of people out there with extra cash at the time, so once again unlikely. But because Lou drew them that way, I'm going to build my car as a deluxe. So I've got a set of cowl lights for it, I've got a set of new old stock bumper overriders for it, and that'll just give it the deluxe trim on the car. And once again, we'll go with all the things the deluxe car would have had, so it'll have leather trim and things like that in it. Be kind of cool. Treasure, treasure, treasure.
It's like Christmas for you, isn't it?
Yes. Now, very lucky to get this. It's a left-hand door handle, but it is as good as you are ever going to find. And I really expected that I'd have to find one from Australia, because the left-hand door being the passenger door rather than the driver's door. But this one came from eBay from America, and clearly it must have been off a back door, not a front door, because it just hasn't had the use. Normally these original handles wear quite badly around here, and this ferrule will rock around on them, and I was sort of hoping that I'd get a good back right-hand door handle to go with it. So I've got a pair of original handles, and once again keeps the car that whole resto rotted look. I still don't have a driver's side door handle. Now naturally I'm going to technology it up a little bit, but I want it all stealth mode and I want it all to look like it belongs there. So I've got these, both of them are new old stock. One's a genuine Ford and one's an aftermarket one, but it's a Holly part, and Holly were Ford suppliers, so I'm guessing it is the same part, just in a Holly box. But that is a new old stock courtesy light switch for a 1949 Ford. And so naturally we all like the interior light to come on when we open our car door, but I didn't want to put a plastic switch out of a Falcon or a Mustang or something like that in there and have it look completely wrong for the era. So I've got these nice metal ones, and once again it's as close as you're going to get to what a 34 Ford could have had at the time. And this little noddy, this is what opens the windscreen. The 34 Fords, the windscreens open out at the bottom for ventilation. That's the old-fashioned air conditioning. So you've got this little crank arrangement to open the windscreen, so you can have the windscreen open while you're driving the car. So that'll open the bottom of the windscreen out, and that's also the reason why the wipers are pivoted at the top of the windscreen, not at the bottom, because it could be a bit tricky making the wipers work if the windscreen's open otherwise. So, but that's an original 1934 Ford part. So that 85-year-old part, it's in as good a condition as you're ever going to find. Here's a selection of goodies. That's the V8 badge for the grille. That's once again a used 1934 Ford part.
Wow.
And in this I've got the moulding that fits on the top of the radiator shell, and although it's got a chip out of it, that's a new old stock Ford badge for it as well. So I'm hoping I can find someone somewhere that can actually repair the enamel surface on it and bring it back to looking as new. And I'd really like to replace the blue with black. Blue is correct everywhere in the world, but in the Model A's, the Canadian built cars, which is what we had in Australia, had a black background on the Ford logo instead of the blue one. So my 34 Ford, and given that I've got Model A's as well, I'd like to tone the black in there, and my car's going to be black as well, so that'll just sort of add to the whole theme of keeping it together. You've got to have a plan. Wow, one shelf done. Now here's a big box of treasure, got from a friend of mine. And it's a pair of headlights. Now they've had the usual damage from the bonnet being dropped on them when people have been opening and closing the bonnet, so they need a bit of restoration work. And there's a pair of horns, and the horns are in pretty good nick for their age, but once again they'll both need repairing, and my car will be a 12 volt car rather than a 6 volt car, so I'll either fit a resistor or I'll put these in series to drop the voltage to the two horns and run the power through one horn and then through into the other one. But we'll wait until we get that far before we decide what we're doing. Here's a Holden-y thing. I collect all the original Holden keys I can find and key barrels for various models, because I actually take them apart and recode them so I can actually have one key for a car, same as they were from factory. And it's very hard these days to find a 1960s or 1970s Holden with the original keys. So I just collect them up and I pull them apart, and in the bottom of there'll be a whole heap of the little poles and springs out of the barrels that I've been playing with. This is my little box of Holden key barrels. Now this is the original steering lock and ignition switch out of the little Roadster Ute that's way over in the corner. And when I got the car, the key was broken off in the ignition. And I looked at it for a long time trying to work out how I could get the key out of it. And what I did in the end was to actually get a tiny little drill bit and drill into the end of the key. And I went in, I don't know, 3/16 of an inch, probably about 4 millimetres. And then I got a bit of stranded copper wire and twisted it so it would slide into the little hole, and got my electric soldering iron and ran a little bit of solder in there, and then a heap of lubricant on the key, and I was able to pull on the wire and get the broken key off. And then we took it to a man who cuts keys, and he cut us a new key for it off that. So anything is possible, you just got to work out a way of doing it. But I got it all to work. That goes in and out, the ignition switch goes on and off, and electrical current works through it. So that's probably going to wind up in the Coupe Ute, but not sure yet. I've got the kind of feeling that the little Roadster Ute will get going too sooner or later, and it might go back in its original car. Hello. My friend Keith's come to help. So what we're doing, just going to unload the rest of these shelves. I've been talking to people about the stuff that's on there, but they get the gist. I've got a whole heap of treasure for my Ford car, so I think we'll just get into it now you're here and get them unloaded and get them moved, and then we can think about getting the car out. These are cool. This is for the spare wheel, so people wouldn't steal the spare wheel. As an accessory, you could buy a locking hubcap and take the key out. Your little Ford emblem flips over the keyhole, and you flip him up and put the key in it, and you can unlock it to get it off the wheel. So that's the locking mechanism there. So how neat is that? So I'm going to build my car up with 2 spare wheels, one on each fender. So I've got 2 hubcaps, and I've only got the one key, so I've got to get a key made for this one. But once again, I'd like to recode them, so I've got one key for the ignition, the doors and the hubcaps, and it'll all work together. This is for my 1967 Holden Ute project, and it's a genuine Holden bell housing, but to take the Saginaw 4-speed gearbox, which was an option in the later model cars. So Keith's a noisy bugger, isn't he? I'm not going to use a Saginaw 4-speed in the car. I'm going to put a T5 overdrive 5-speed in it. But the early T5s from out of a Commodore V8 ran the Saginaw bolt pattern on the front of the box. So that gearbox will bolt onto here, and I've got an S10 Chevy extension housing or tail housing there on the back of it, and that gets my gear stick in the same location as the factory 4-speed. So that all bolts together and becomes a unit, and it all works. So that's treasure. This one came out of the Bunbury railway station, and it's for the Wagen Loco. Now, my lovely wife Deb is from Wagen town, so when I saw this in the second-hand shop, I thought, yeah, we've got to have that. So we brought it home. And there's another one just like it over the other side with Lake Grace Loco written on it, and that's the sort of the next town out along the line from Wagen, roughly. Yeah, and dust. Look at that! Mission accomplished. Might need a dust off. More friends. It's Bill.
G'day, Bill.
This is good. Ready to get into it and help?
Yeah.
That's good. We need to move stuff.
Fantastic.
So the plan is to get all of this off the chassis rails, so anything that is on there can be undone with the tech driver and moved, and we'll just stack as much of it as we can just down the end there. So these loose pieces that are sitting around the rails, that tailgate, all the stuff on the running boards, if we just stack them in a pile, we can even use the paint bench, and we can put stuff in the spray booth as well.
Right.
So we've got to get it torn down. Isn't my Ford beautiful? Now, it got locked in here some years ago when I started doing the development of this front piece of the shed, and the first piece of concrete we laid down had this all located in that spot. So it was a case of where can I put it so it's out of the way. So then I thought, oh yeah, I can clear out this space here and put it in the way, and I can get it out later. But then later sort of involved development around me, the spray booth going in, and so now we've sort of got this problem of squeezing it back out of this tiny space in the back. And it's been here so long that when I bought this second-hand paint shaker, I needed a location for it, and I thought, that's a good spot. So I welded a bracket on there and just bolted it onto the table that the Ford's on. So get this table out of here, I'm going to have to find a new home for that as well. Sharp edges on that, just be careful where the holes in there. Pillar. And crash up, over it goes. Together. I love these little tech screws for putting things together with until I'm ready to commit and weld it together. But they go in and out, they drill their own hole, and if the hole wears out you can drill another one beside it and just fill the first hole with weld. That all works. Just awesome. You ready?
Right, second metal, where's it going?
In the booth. Now it doesn't look like a car at all. Running boards have got to come off.
Are they bolted?
Yeah, they are, and they're tricky because there's bolt heads on the inside of the rails.
They made it difficult at all.
No, I made it difficult because the original chassis is not a box.
It's a C-code.
Yeah, so...
You can't blame Ford for that.
No, you can't blame Ford at all, you just blame Rob. I thought long and hard about it. Originally I was going to weld in studs from the inside of the frame that poked outwards.
Yeah.
And then I sat there and looked at the cost of buying the studs and the freight, and then I thought I can actually get my fingers through the holes on the inside of the frame rails, and you've only got to put them on once.
That's right. Once
But in mock-up you put them on and take them off about 50 times.
Seems like the C design would have made that a bit easier to get at those bolts.
Yeah, it was. But to license it as a hot rod in Australia, it's got to be boxed. And I've made the compromise with putting these big holes on the inside because it follows the evolution that Ford did with the frame. And so the later model frames that are box, but they built their box with two C's. So one went over the top, one tucked inside, and they had these holes down the inside. So that's the final evolution of this style of frame. And even if you look at Toyota Land Cruiser frames and Hilux frames, they're built in the same pattern with the two C's that fit inside each other and a row of holes down the inside of them. So the holes just reduce the weight, they don't reduce the strength of it. So, and that's the thing, it's a feature, something to make it worth looking at. So I've got a bit of evolutionary changes to do as well. I'm going to lower... Keith's noisy bugger. I'm going to lower these top edges down a little bit, and I'll press a rib in the floor to run down to it. I originally planned that the drive shaft would run under here, but it needs to be up a bit higher, so this box section is going to have to come out, and we'll turn it. We'll go back to how Ford did it with a cross member underneath it rather than on top of it. But my original plan was to box it top and bottom for strength in the frame, and we'd have a belly-shaped one underneath it, and that could still happen. It's just this one might come up and over the transmission and the drive shaft. So there we go. Nearly ready to cut it off, get it out of here. So the only things left holding the frame to the table are these two brackets. So once they're cut free, it'll come out. So once the running board's off, we can look at that. I've got a weld down here that's too tight to get the grinder in it, but nifty little trick. I've got this sharp shouldered rotary burr on my die grinder, and with that I can use the corner of it to actually cut the weld. So I'll run up there along that weld, and there's another one hiding in the back here too that's a little bit too close as well. So if I split them as much as I can, and then I'll give them a hit with the hammer, and they should just shatter off, I hope, with a bit of luck. Knew I put the paint shaker there for a reason. It was so I'd have an air hose for playing Fords. Almost. Haha! It has broken free. Mission accomplished. Alright, if you, each of you grab a back corner and just have a feel. If you'd say it's too heavy, we'll use the tractor. So that's the thing. So like I say, all you got to do is say it's too heavy, and we'll just lift it with the tractor. So. Yeah, no, it's too heavy. I've got too much weight on my end by myself, so yeah. So if we had another bloke, yeah. So soon we're about to grab the tractor, we'll sling this up, and we're going to creep it out. We'll take the bandsaw out the way from over there, and then we'll be able to swing it around and drop it straight onto our axles. So I am pumped. This is cool. Come on, let's get the door open. Hey, you going to help? Did you open the door? Hey? Did you open the door? Oh, that good boy. Help. Well, it's been a monumental effort today. We have got the frame finally out of the corner, and I've got a few bits and pieces to do before I can start stacking body panels back on it, but I'm going to have to get the spring clamps on both ends to stabilise the frame on the springs themselves, and I'll put something in to actually hold the radius rods at roughly the right height so that I can wheel it around, and I'll have to put a tie rod on for the front suspension so that the wheels will actually track in line, make it more user friendly. And so thanks guys. I'm Rob Teal.
I'm Keith White.
I'm Bill Till.
Thank you for watching. This whole attachment looks very ungainly, but it saved my bacon more than once. And it was made for a special job many years ago. The big piece of shed out the front started out in life as a small shed in the Busselton and Light Industrial area that I bought. And Dad and I went and pulled it down, and we got all the tin off and all the purlins off, and we had the trusses and the poles to get down. And we'd looked at the cost of hiring a crane, couldn't get one on the day, and then I thought, why not just take a tractor to town and put an extension on the hay point, because we carried around hay bales on this attachment back here. So we made this after work and fronted in the next day to pull the roof trusses down from the shed, and there was a crew already on site that was starting to build the new premises on the place, and they thought, great amusement, here's a couple of farmers rock up with our farm hats on, the whole deal, with a farm tractor, and we fronted up to the first truss and everyone stops work to actually start watching what we were doing, and by the time we lifted the second truss down without a vent, everyone else had got bored with us and had to go back to their usual jobs. So saved me then, but it's been used for many, many jobs after that. Isn't my Ford beautiful?